This is a talk on the Isaiah Project, an occasional piece fitting between the series that we just finished and the series we were looking forward to doing in the future. It's about a particular poem that we find in the Isaiah text, and these little poems are all over the place in the Isaiah text, and they have an important contribution to make to the Isaiah text. It's very important to the people who are putting this text together to be able to produce these special poems. And one of them comes in chapter 18. Uh, I call it A Message to Cush. And I'd like to share with you how this poem, hidden in the context of the Isaiah scroll, steps out to give us something very special. It's a good example of what happens with a close reading of the biblical text in the original Hebrew. I've often passed over this reference to the land of Cush in the Isaiah text, always curious about it, interested, but it was always just a rock in the road. In the course of this close reading, it occurs to me that it is nothing less than a diamond. And so I would like to open that diamond up for you and let you be able to see, I think, the light that is within it. The poem is just 8 lines long, yet the ancient editor awarded it a whole chapter. This suggested that he, someone else other than myself, saw this poem as being quite special. It's superbly crafted. It has suffered little or no editorial intrusions. It's a credit to its rigor as a poem. It is marked by a number of words that occur only in this poem, nowhere else in the Hebrew Bible. These are known by translators as hapax legomenos. That might be taken to imply a lack of craft, but while they present translators with problems, they are in fact signs of vitality and poetic ingenuity. We will also see that the poet steps into the open with a personal testimony. Now, this is unusual in the Isaiah text, and it is very likely to be the work of that person called Isaiah himself. If that doesn't seem to be a big deal to you, it's because you're still assuming that this book of Isaiah was written by Isaiah. In fact, the book of Isaiah was composed by a number of poets, thinkers, and editors, including Isaiah, working together in a common school, which we call the prophetic school of Jerusalem. In fact, the last time we actually heard the actual voice of Isaiah was in chapter 8, where Isaiah expands on his early prophecy handed over to King Ahaz in chapter 7. The poem was composed and curated sometime shortly after the death of King Ahaz. That'd be 714. The Assyrian Empire had by then brought the Palestinian coast under its control. It had campaigned all the way down the Jordan Valley to the Arabia, and it had taken control over the northern kingdom as early as 733. And finally, with the death of its last king and the destruction of Jerusalem, totally erased it, 722. The southern kingdom, all the while, however, avoided an attack, although they had been very carefully to pay tribute to Assyria. In 714, they had a new king, Hezekiah, and the prophetic school resident in Jerusalem was engaged at that time in the study of Jerusalem's future in a world transformed by the Assyrian Empire. The poem was clearly constructed to be performed and not to be read. It consists of 3 stanzas. The audience is seated in Jerusalem on Mount Zion, and it is called to use their imagination and to be taken off to a distant and exotic land. The closing stanza will bring us back to that distant and far off exotic land and then bring it home to the audience on Mount Zion. The center stanza is built around the personal testimony, which is the message that the audience is meant to take home. The testimony is followed with an agricultural metaphor. The cultivation of grapes, it insists, is a process. It takes time, just as living through a geopolitical upheaval is a process and takes time. Imagine now that you're included in this gathering of the prophetic school, assembled on Mount Zion. The poet rises to his feet. He eyes his audience and then begins. Ah, land of whirring wings, which passes up the rivers of the Cush, send envoys today through all the reeds and over all the faces of the waters. Go, fleet messengers, to a nation tall and sleek, to a most feared people, a nation of might and of tramplers, whose land is riven with rivers. All who live in the world, who dwell on earth, an ensign has been raised on the mountain. Take note, a shofar has been blown, hearken. Thus Yahweh Sabaoth has said to me, be calm and trust in my foundation. For as the heat of the bud comes with the light, so the moistening cloud with the heat of the harvest. Before the harvest comes to its end, heat on the blossom, the sour grape turns ripe. Then the trimming of twigs and the pruning hooks, the cutting and trailings of branches. What is left is to be eaten together by the kites on the mountain and the cattle on the land. Summer for the kites, for the cattle winter. At that time, tribute will be brought to Yahweh Sabaoth by a nation most feared people, a nation of might and of tramplers, whose land is riven with rivers, to a place that resides the name of Yahweh Sabaoth, Mount Zion. Note the circle. You begin in Zion and you end in Zion. In the time between, when the heat of the light begins the growing process and the heat of the harvest completes it with the following up work, one needs to be calm and trust in what God has established. The word translated be calm is not common Hebrew for calm, but it is interestingly the word that Isaiah used when he met the then newly crowned King Ahaz at the Gihon Spring in chapter 7. He tells him, be calm and not afraid. This link adds to the impression that here in chapter 18, 20, 30 years later, we are hearing the very voice of Isaiah. My translation of the poem cannot capture the artfulness of the Hebrew poetry. For example, in the metaphor, heat on the bud, heat of the harvest, turned ripe, are an alliteration. Cam for heat, repeated, and then tam for turning ripe. Cam, tam, gives the line a kind of a drumbeat that moves it forward, moves it along in the process of waiting. There's a more detailed study to this poem that I'm going to publish on the Elder of Omaha for those who would be interested in looking at more detailed the way this poem is constructed. But we'll leave it at that for now. The Isaiah Project, of which this is a part, is currently between series. The first series, early First Isaiah, covered chapters 3 through 12 and was published earlier this year on this channel. The second series, Middle First Isaiah, will cover chapters 13 through 28 and is currently under construction. Hopefully that'll be ready in late May, early June. In the interim, there we will look at probably another individual poem or two. These poems, like the one in 18, deal with how to wait through this transformation that Jerusalem is living through. The prophetic school insists that it's not simply enduring an evil, but it is a transformation that implies the need for Jerusalem and Israel itself to be changed. The task of the prophetic school is to identify that change and facilitate and press for it to come about in the life of the kingdom.